Right, so we're diving deep today into ICH guidelines, specifically Q10 and Q11.
Okay, yeah.
And you want to know, right, how they fit in with those cGMPs.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Especially, I think, when we're talking about pharmaceutical quality systems
Yes.
and then drug substance development.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it's kind of like adding this whole nother level,
Right.
of quality control to what's already, pretty tightly regulated.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like, how does that actually work?
Well, I think a good way to think about it is that, cGMPs are the bedrock, right? That's
Yeah.
the foundation that sets the kind of essential standards.
Mm-hmm.
But what Q10 and Q11 do is they come in and kind of elevate the entire structure,
Wow.
and they encourage a more proactive and kind of scientifically driven approach.
Okay.
So it's almost like you're building quality into the very DNA of how pharmaceuticals are developed.
That makes sense.
From the initial concept all the way to the final product.
Yeah, so I'm interested in, like, how does this actually play out?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
are we talking about, like, theoretical frameworks here? Or do these guidelines actually have teeth?
Oh, they absolutely have teeth. In fact, many companies have found that embracing these guidelines actually leads to a more robust and adaptable quality system.
Really?
Yeah, and I've actually, seen examples where companies have successfully used like Q10's principles to really improve things like their change management processes.
Interesting.
So instead of just reacting to issues, as they pop up, they're actually anticipating and mitigating risks
Wow.
before they even arise.
That's pretty powerful. Can you give me an example?
Well, let's see. One example is, I've worked with companies that have implemented CAPA systems.
Okay, and remind me what CAPA is again.
Yeah, so CAPA stands for corrective and preventive actions.
Right.
And it's not just about fixing a problem after it occurs, but really digging deeper to understand what those root causes are. And then preventing them from happening again in the future.
Okay.
So, for example, I worked with a company that they implemented this CAPA system, and it actually helped them to identify this recurring issue with a specific piece of equipment they were using.
Okay.
And because they had this CAPA system in place, they were able to actually address that problem head on.
Gotcha.
And prevent potential, batch failures down the road, which, save them a lot of time and resources in the long run.
That's a perfect example. So it's like, it's not just compliance, it's really improving the entire process.
Exactly, yeah. And that same kind of proactive mindset is also echoed in Q11, which focuses specifically on the development and manufacture of drug substances.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about Q11. What are the key takeaways there?
Well, one of the, I think, most important aspects of Q11 is this emphasis on selecting and justifying the starting materials that you use.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about knowing what you're using, but it's about understanding, the potential impact of even like minor changes to those starting materials on that final drug substance.
Interesting.
So imagine, for example, you're developing a new painkiller, right? You need to think about how are those starting materials going to impact not only the drug's, effectiveness,
right,
but also things like its stability, its shelf life, and even potential side effects.
Wow. So you're really trying to think about this ahead of time.
Precisely, yeah. And so Q11 really guides you through this very thorough assessment of your starting materials to make sure that they meet very stringent quality standards and they're well suited for that intended purpose.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see, like, all this stuff, if you plan ahead of time,
right,
it's probably going to save you a lot of headaches later.
Exactly.
So are there any other key elements of Q11 that we should talk about?
Yeah, another really critical aspect of Q11 is this concept of a control strategy for drug substances.
Okay.
And this strategy is really all about, ensuring consistent quality by carefully managing those critical process parameters and material attributes. So it's a dynamic plan that evolves. throughout the drug's life cycle, as new knowledge emerges.
So it sounds like Q11 is really encouraging this like data-driven, adaptable approach
Exactly.
to drug development.
Yeah, it's very much about that.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. So one of the, I think, really fascinating outcomes of having a well-defined control strategy is that it allows you to establish what's called a design space.
A design space. What is that?
Yeah, so this is essentially a pre-approved range of conditions for your manufacturing process. That's based on this like deep understanding you have of how all these different parameters influence the quality of that final drug substance.
So you're kind of like, you know what you can do, you know where the boundaries are.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you can move within that space.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like having a roadmap, right? For making adjustments without having to go through these like lengthy regulatory hurdles each time.
I see. So you've already gotten that approval.
Right, exactly.
As long as you stay within that space.
Exactly.
That's really useful.
Yeah. And that flexibility can be a real game changer in real world manufacturing scenarios.
I bet.
Because it allows for fine-tuning and optimization.
Right.
While still ensuring that you're maintaining that consistent quality.
That's awesome.
And staying within those predefined boundaries.
Very cool. This design space, it's fascinating. It really seems like it can empower manufacturers to be more agile, but still keep those high standards.
Exactly.
Do you have any examples of
Sure.
how companies have used this design space?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In the real world?
So there was this biotech company I worked with, and they used the design space to optimize their manufacturing process for this new monoclonal antibody. And by really carefully studying, all the different factors that impact the final product, they were able to identify a range of like acceptable conditions for temperature, pH, all those key parameters. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so what this let them do was it let them actually make adjustments like on the fly.
Wow.
So they could respond to like real-time variations without compromising quality or needing to halt production to get, regulatory approval every time.
So that's real efficiency.
Exactly, yeah.
It's not just, checking off boxes. It's a whole framework for innovating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about It's about understanding that science to a point where you can be flexible.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to Q10 and Q11 and how they connect with cGMPs.
Yes.
We've been talking about how they expand on them, but I'm still not quite clear on how they all, come together.
So think about it as a pyramid, okay?
Okay.
So you've got cGMPs at the base. That's that solid foundation.
Yeah.
Outlining those fundamental requirements for manufacturing, processing, packaging, all of that.
Gotcha.
And then Q10, that adds the next layer.
Okay.
It focuses on that overarching quality system, that culture of continuous improvement. And then Q11 comes in at the top. And that targets the specific development and manufacturing.
So it's a hierarchy.
Exactly.
Building up.
Yeah.
That's a really good visual. I like that.
Yeah. So it's not about replacing cGMPs.
Right.
It's about, building on top of them with these more sophisticated and science-driven approaches. And what's really neat is that, even though they're rigorous, they're not static.
Yeah.
They evolve as science advances and as the industry learns more.
The landscape's always changing.
Right.
You got to keep up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything else about this
interconnectedness?
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight that adopting Q10 and Q11, it's not just about meeting those regulatory requirements.
Right.
It's really about fostering this mindset of quality.
Okay, yeah.
Throughout the whole organization.
It's about moving beyond that checklist mentality.
I see.
And really embracing that proactive, data-driven.
And baking it in.
Exactly.
It's part of the DNA.
Exactly.
And I imagine that leads to.
It does.
Some pretty big benefits.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Beyond just compliance.
Yeah, so companies that have really embraced these, they often see improved efficiency.
Oh.
They reduce the risk of those costly deviations.
Yeah.
And sometimes even,
Wow.
enhanced innovation.
So they're able to bring new drugs to market faster.
Yeah.
But also feeling more confident about the quality and safety.
That's exactly it.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's really a testament to how valuable these guidelines are.
Yeah.
It's not just about, jumping through hoops.
Right.
It's actually making things better.
Yeah. It's fundamentally improving how we develop and manufacture these medicines.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, it's about shifting that whole paradigm.
Away from just meeting.
Yeah, from just meeting the minimum
to
really striving for that excellence.
Yeah, I like
in
that.
every aspect of pharmaceutical quality.
This has been a really great explanation of Q10 and Q11.
Good.
I'm starting to see them not as like this burden, but as like a way to get to a
roadmap.
Yeah, a roadmap, a better future
exactly
for drug development.
Yeah, I like that.
And it makes me think about something you mentioned earlier about this cough medicine, Thorexin. That sounds like a story we need to hear.
Yeah, Thorexin, it's a really fascinating look at the regulatory landscape back in the early 70s.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And this case revolved around a notice published in the Federal Register.
And the Federal Register, that's the
official journal
of the U.S. government.
All right, so what was so special about this cough medicine?
Well, in 1973, Thorexin was under review by the FDA for its safety and effectiveness. But before they made a final decision, the FDA, they did something kind of interesting.
What'd they do?
They published a notice of opportunity for a hearing in the Federal Register on February 2nd. And what this did was it essentially opened the door for anybody who had an interest in Thorexin to give their opinion.
So like the public.
Yeah, exactly.
A good way in.
Exactly. It highlights how important transparency is and due process in these regulatory decisions.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's not about making these decisions behind closed doors.
Behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's about making sure all voices are heard.
Right.
And all the information is considered.
That's good to know.
Yeah. And
that same commitment to transparency is reflected in how the guidelines themselves are actually developed.
So it's a real collaborative effort.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing to think about all the people involved.
Yeah.
The collaboration.
Absolutely.
And when we're talking about ensuring drug quality, it makes me think about bioavailability and bioequivalence.
Oh yeah.
There's kind of like fundamental.
Oh, absolutely. They're critical.
So whole approval process, right?
Yeah. So bioavailability. That basically refers to how much of the drug actually reaches the bloodstream where it can,
do its thing.
Have its effect.
Yeah.
And bioequivalence, that's comparing.
Right. So that compares two versions of the drug and how similar they are. In terms of their bioavailability. So it's not just having like the right ingredient. You got to make sure.
You got to make sure it gets absorbed.
Yeah.
And it's actually reaching.
Yeah, where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And this is where those FDA guidelines on waivers come in, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So
it's in vivo.
So they lay out the criteria.
Bioavailability study.
Right. For when those in vivo studies, which involve testing in living organisms, might not be necessary.
Okay, so like for example, if a drug
like if it's not meant to be,
isn't supposed to be absorbed
into the bloodstream,
like a topical cream or something.
Yeah, like a topical cream, that's a great example.
Okay.
But even in those cases, you still have to show bioequivalence
using some other method.
Right, using other scientifically valid methods.
Gotcha. You got to prove it.
Yeah.
So are there different ways to show that?
Oh yeah, there's a whole range of methods. From those in vivo studies to more complex in vitro approaches, which are done in the lab.
Right.
And the FDA guidelines, they even outline like specific types of evidence
that you can use.
To measure that bioavailability.
So they've thought this through.
They really have, and they take into account things like the purpose of the study, the analytical methods that are available, the nature of the drug itself.
It seems very, very thorough.
It is, yeah.
Now, is there specific guidance for certain types of products?
The FDA, they actually published this resource.
Okay.
It's called Approved Drug Products with Therapeutic Equivalence Evaluations.
What a mouthful.
Yeah, I know, right? But
this basically outlines...
It outlines specific bioequivalence requirements for certain products.
Gotcha.
So, it keeps things consistent and clear.
Right, so you know what you're dealing with.
Exactly.
What about when you submit a new drug application?
Right, so when you submit a new drug application or like a supplemental application, you might need to provide that evidence of in vivo bioavailability or bioequivalence.
But there are some exceptions.
Right, so the FDA, they may waive that requirement.
Under certain circumstances.
Under certain circumstances, yeah.
So when might they do that?
Well, for instance, if the drug meets certain criteria.
Like what?
Laid out in the guidelines.
Give me an example.
So a common scenario would be a solution intended for intravenous administration. Okay. And the FDA has, very clear criteria for these situations.
So they're making sure that it's appropriate.
Exactly.
But also safe.
Right.
And effective.
Yep.
It's really good to know that they're paying attention to all this.
They are, yeah. And this extends beyond just the active ingredient. Okay. So the FDA also has guidelines for inactive ingredients and the overall composition
of the drug.
So
they're not just looking at one little piece. They're looking at
the whole picture. Yeah. Making sure all those components are safe, they're effective.
They work together.
And they work together, yeah.
It's like they're safeguarding.
Yeah.
Every step of the way.
Exactly. They're leaving no room for error.
Yeah.
And they're ensuring that final product...
The one that reaches the patient.
The one that reaches the patient is the highest quality.
This has been really eye-opening.
Good.
I'm really starting to understand the complexity of all this.
It is complex.
But also how important it is.
It is, yeah.
To get it right.
Absolutely. And, it's really a testament to all those scientists and researchers and regulators who are working hard to
make sure
keep people safe.
Yeah, that it's all safe.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm walking away from this.
Yeah.
With such a greater understanding.
It's a fascinating world.
Of the whole process.
It is.
Thank you.
Well, keep that curiosity burning.
Oh,
there's always more to learn.
I'm definitely going to keep digging into this.
Awesome.